The Morrison Mansion, located on a quiet street in Boston's upscale Beacon Hill neighborhood, was bathed in spring sunlight. Elizabeth Morrison stood by the window, gazing at the azaleas blooming in the garden, realizing that a new chapter in her life was about to begin. Elizabeth had established herself as a successful graphic designer in Boston. Her design firm, Creative Vision, had earned the trust of many clients for its innovative approach and delicate sense of color. Behind her calm demeanor and intellectual air was a long history of struggle that only she knew. When Elizabeth was 10 years old, a car accident on the way home from a family trip changed her life forever. A drunk driver's car collided with theirs, and Elizabeth's face, sitting in the passenger seat, was badly damaged by shattered glass and metal fragments. After hovering between life and death, she survived, but her once pretty features were lost. "Lizzie, tea is ready," her mother Martha's gentle voice called from the living room. During Elizabeth's surgeries and recovery days, Martha never left the hospital, staying by her daughter's side. Together with her husband John, they did everything possible for their daughter's treatment. "Coming, Mom," Elizabeth replied. Elizabeth left her study and headed for the living room where her family was gathering. Sunlight streaming through the large windows gently illuminated the antique furniture. Her father John sat in his favorite armchair with a newspaper spread open. His straight posture revealed his meticulousness as an engineer. "Our genius designer seems busy today," John smiled as he looked up from his newspaper. "It's a new project. I've been asked to design a brochure for a gallery opening next month," Elizabeth answered as she sat down next to her father. Her face still bore faint traces of 7 reconstructive surgeries. Starting with the initial emergency surgery, followed by restorative procedures, and operations to regain function, Elizabeth had spent her youth going through repeated surgeries and recovery periods. However, thanks to an excellent team of doctors, she had recovered to the point where it was barely noticeable at first glance. "Lizzie's designs are always wonderful," Martha said as she handed her daughter a teacup. "Is Michael going to be late again today?" Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. "Yes, he said he has to explain some new medical equipment at a delivery site. But he said he'd be home in time for dinner." Meeting Michael Harrison had been an unexpected gift in Elizabeth's life. It happened 3 years ago at a medical equipment exhibition. While she was checking a client's booth design, a man with sincere eyes approached her. Michael was a sales manager for a high-end medical equipment manufacturer, and Elizabeth naturally opened her heart to his genuine personality and deep compassion. "Have you heard from Vicky?" John asked. Elizabeth's expression clouded slightly. "I got an email this morning. She said she'll be late today." Her sister Victoria worked in the fashion industry. There had been a subtle distance between the sisters since childhood. Especially after the accident, the gap seemed to deepen. On the surface, Victoria appeared to cherish her relationship with her sister, but Elizabeth sometimes sensed something hidden behind her sister's smile. As their parents devoted all their attention to Elizabeth's surgeries and recovery, young Victoria was inevitably relegated to second place. It wasn't uncommon for her school plays or birthday parties to be postponed due to Elizabeth's surgeries or hospital visits. Their parents loved Victoria too, but for a long time, Elizabeth's life and recovery had been the top priority. "By the way, Michael's father called," Martha changed the subject. "He said he wants to discuss something about the wedding preparations." "Dr. William?" Elizabeth asked with surprise. Michael's father, Dr. William Harrison, was a renowned plastic surgeon who, coincidentally, had been a member of the team involved in Elizabeth's surgeries. When Elizabeth and Michael's engagement was announced, Dr. Harrison expressed heartfelt joy that a former patient is becoming family. "Michael's father is an admirable person," John nodded. "It's reassuring to have such a professional joining our family." Just then, the sound of the front door opening was heard. "I'm home." Victoria's cheerful voice echoed as she breezed into the living room. "Vicky, you're home early," Martha said with surprise. "I finished work quickly. I wouldn't forget my sister's important dress-fitting day." Victoria smiled at her sister. Her perfect makeup and cutting-edge fashion sense reflected her glamorous profession. "Thank you, Vicky," Elizabeth returned a genuine smile. But at that moment, something seemed to flash behind Victoria's smile. Elizabeth couldn't tell what it was, but an uneasy feeling passed through her chest. When Victoria had agreed to be the maid of honor, she had seemed truly happy. But sometimes Elizabeth sensed something hidden behind her sister's smile. Elizabeth pushed away those thoughts and focused on the wedding talk. A new life with Michael was about to begin. The happiness she had finally found after overcoming past wounds. Nothing and no one could destroy that. The doorbell rang, and Elizabeth's face lit up. Michael's here. As she stood up and headed for the door, Victoria watched her back with a complex expression. In May, 1 month before the wedding in Boston, Elizabeth was making final confirmations with the wedding venue coordinator at the Massachusetts State Botanical Garden, where roses were in full bloom. "Let's arrange the blue and white slightly differently for each table," she explained. Her keen sensibility as a designer naturally showed in her own wedding. "Lizzie, look at this," Victoria called out cheerfully. She approached Elizabeth with a large file in hand. "I consulted with the wedding planner and made this slideshow. I plan to play it at the reception." Elizabeth opened the file and smiled at the photos inside. There were pictures from her childhood, high school days, and memories with Michael, all beautifully laid out. "It's lovely, Vicky," Elizabeth said with a genuine smile. "But could you please not include photos from after the accident?" Victoria's expression stiffened momentarily. "Of course. If that's what you want," she shrugged slightly. "But I think it would be fine to show everyone the journey you've overcome. I'm proud of your strength." Elizabeth felt uneasy about her sister's suggestion but didn't strongly object, thinking she meant well. "I'll think about it," she replied. That night, after finishing her design work in her home office, Elizabeth took out an old album from a drawer. There were few photos from the years after the accident. She had disliked having cameras pointed at her. She didn't want to record her appearance with the vivid surgical scars. She only started appearing in photos again after her 7th surgery. The phone rang. It was a video call from Michael. His warm smile appeared on the screen. "Hey, beautiful bride. How was your day?" "Vicky made a slideshow," Elizabeth said with some hesitation. "But she wants to use photos from after the accident." Michael's expression darkened. "If you don't like it, you can refuse." "I know. But I'm glad Vicky is thinking of me," Elizabeth sighed. "After the accident, my family always prioritized me. I think she sacrificed a lot." "You're too kind," Michael said. "By the way, my father wants to see you. He's asking if you can have lunch with him at the hospital tomorrow." "With Dr. William?" Elizabeth was a bit surprised. Michael's father was supposed to be a busy surgeon. "Of course, I'd be happy to." The next day, she had lunch with Dr. William Harrison at the Harrison Plastic Surgery Clinic. With salt and pepper hair and a warm gaze, William seemed a bit different from the strict doctor in Elizabeth's memory. "Elizabeth, it's been a while," William took her hand and smiled kindly. "When was the last time I examined you?" 8 years ago, Elizabeth answered. "During the follow-up for my last surgery." "That's right," William nodded. "Your recovery was medically remarkable. An amazing strength of will." He gazed intently at Elizabeth's face. "One of the most proud works I've handled." Elizabeth, slightly embarrassed, conveyed her gratitude. "Thanks to you, I'm able to walk a new path in life." "So, how are the wedding preparations going?" William changed the subject. "Michael is quite excited." "They're going well. Victoria is helping a lot as the maid of honor." "Victoria." William repeated the name thoughtfully. "Your sister, right?" "Yes. Lately, she's been working really hard for the wedding," Elizabeth said. "But sometimes, I feel like she's acting a bit strange." "In what way?" William asked calmly. "She's collecting my old photos. From after the accident," Elizabeth said with some difficulty. "She wants to use them in a slideshow." William's expression turned stern for a moment. "Is that what you want?" "To be honest, I'm not very keen on it," Elizabeth shook her head slightly. "But she thinks she's doing it for me." "Elizabeth," William said with a serious look. "Sometimes family members, especially sisters, can have complex emotions. At this important time when you're starting a new life with Michael, it's important to honor your own feelings. Elizabeth felt the weight of those words, but before she could think deeply about it, William's secretary came in to announce an urgent call. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. We'll continue this conversation another time," he said as he stood up and left. As Elizabeth left the clinic, she happened to stop by the waiting room. There, she witnessed an unexpected sight, Victoria talking at the reception desk. As Elizabeth was about to call out to her, Victoria hurriedly tucked something into her purse and turned around with a surprised expression. "Lizzie. Why are you here?" Her voice was higher than usual and seemed agitated. "I was having lunch with Dr. William," Elizabeth answered. "Why are you here?" "Oh, well." Victoria hesitated. "I was asking if I could see your medical records for the wedding photos. I wanted to better convey your recovery journey." Elizabeth felt something was off. "My medical records? They wouldn't show those to you." "You're right, it was silly of me," Victoria forced a laugh. "Well, I'm heading home now. I have an appointment with the party planner." She hurried away. Elizabeth stood there, feeling anxious about her sister's unnatural behavior. However, with the wedding just around the corner, she put aside her concerns and focused on the preparations. That evening, when Elizabeth told Michael about this over the phone, he advised with a slightly worried voice, "You're too kind. If something seems off, you should speak up clearly." "I don't want to make a big issue out of it with the wedding so close," Elizabeth smiled at Michael on the other end of the phone. "Everything will be fine. I'm sure of it." On the wedding day, St. James Church in Boston was shining in the morning light. Sunlight passing through the stained glass painted rainbow patterns on the old marble floor. Blue and white freesias and roses were elegantly arranged on both sides of the aisle, enveloping the entire venue in a clear atmosphere. In the bride's room, Martha was making final adjustments to Elizabeth's wedding dress. The simple, elegant mermaid-line dress accentuated Elizabeth's refined beauty. "Lizzie, you're truly beautiful," Martha said, visibly moved. "All the hardship seems like a distant dream now." Elizabeth smiled. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she recalled the long journey to this day. The accident, countless surgeries, rehabilitation, and the journey to find herself again. Everything had led to this day. "Mom, thank you for always being by my side," she squeezed her mother's hand. There was a knock at the door, and a makeup artist entered for final touches. Victoria followed, looking more radiant than ever in her pale blue bridesmaid dress. "Lizzie, I can't believe it. You look like a movie star," Victoria said brightly. She added to the makeup artist, "Wonderful work. The scars are barely visible." Elizabeth's expression clouded slightly, but she quickly regained her smile. Today was the happiest day of her life. She didn't want to ruin it with small worries. "The slideshow is ready," Victoria said with a confident expression. "Everyone will be moved." "Did you only use the photos I chose?" Elizabeth asked with some anxiety. "Of course," Victoria answered casually. "Don't worry. It's perfect." The ceremony began, and Elizabeth walked down the aisle supported by John's arm. When she saw Michael standing at the altar, her heart filled with warm love. Next to him stood his father William as the best man, looking proudly at the bride. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed on fingers. When the pastor declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," warm applause erupted from the venue. Elizabeth and Michael returned with happy smiles and headed to the reception at the Windsor Hotel's grand ballroom. The reception venue was lavishly decorated. Blue and white organza fabric hung gracefully from the ceiling, and delicate flower arrangements adorned the tables. The venue, which reflected Elizabeth's design sense throughout, was like a fairy tale world. After the cake cutting and toast, it was time for speeches. First, John stood up and delivered a moving father's speech. Then William rose and offered warm words not as a doctor, but as the father-in-law of the woman who would become his son's wife. "I first met Elizabeth when she was still a young patient," William began quietly. "As a doctor, I learned much from her courage and strong will. Today, I couldn't be more proud to see this remarkable woman joining my son in marriage." Tears welled up in Elizabeth's eyes. Michael quietly took her hand and nodded with a smile. Next, Michael stood up and put his feelings for his beloved wife into words. The venue was filled with warm applause, and Elizabeth's heart overflowed with happiness. It was then that Victoria suddenly stood up and grabbed the microphone from the MC. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a moment?" she said in a bright voice. "As a sister, I've prepared a surprise for my sister Elizabeth." Elizabeth looked at Victoria with a confused expression. This wasn't planned. "Let's play a little game, everyone," Victoria said, looking around the venue. There was an unnatural excitement in her voice. "How many plastic surgeries do you think my beautiful sister Elizabeth has had?" Tension rippled through the venue. The blood drained from Elizabeth's face. Michael leaned forward, trying to stop Victoria, but she already had the remote control in hand. "Here's the answer." Victoria pressed the button. What appeared on the large screen was a photo of Elizabeth immediately after the accident. The image of a 10-year-old girl with the left side of her face completely damaged, exposed suture scars. A gasp was heard from the audience. "This was the beginning," Victoria continued. "And this is after the first surgery." Photo after photo was displayed. A face gradually regaining its shape. Yet the scars were still vivid, and the past that Elizabeth had kept hidden for years was now exposed before a crowd of people. Elizabeth stood frozen. Her feet seemed rooted to the floor, and her mind went blank. Michael rushed to her side and tried to put his arm around her shoulder, but she could only tremble. The photos switched one after another, showing Elizabeth's changing appearance with each surgery. Victoria continued to narrate like a commentator. The fourth surgery reconstructed her nose, the fifth reshaped her jawline, the sixth adjusted her cheekbones, and the seventh and final one, she paused for breath, completed the Elizabeth we see today. The venue was wrapped in complete silence. Only Elizabeth's ragged breathing seemed audible. "The answer is 7 times," Victoria declared loudly. "This is the culmination of effort, true beauty, right?" Her tone was tinged with sarcasm. John and Martha stared at their daughter with stunned expressions. Anger was visible on Michael's face. He stood up and began to walk toward Victoria. But at that moment, a figure quietly rose from the back of the venue. It was Dr. William Harrison. He moved forward with a solemn air and quietly took the microphone from Victoria. "Excuse me," his voice was low but resonated throughout the venue. William's face showed deep sadness and indignation. "First, as a doctor, I would like to say a few words about what just happened." He glanced at the photos displayed on the screen. These photos are part of medical records and contain extremely sensitive information related to patient privacy. Disclosing such information without permission not only goes against professional ethics but also raises legal issues. Victoria, appearing somewhat shaken, tried to return to her seat. But William continued. "However, today, I would like to speak not as a doctor, but as a father and as a human being." He looked at Elizabeth. His eyes reflected deep empathy. "I too lost my face in a traffic accident 15 years ago." William touched the faint scar on his right cheek. Small sounds of surprise rose from the audience. "Just like Elizabeth, I only underwent surgery to live. Not in pursuit of beauty, but to survive." His words resonated quietly but powerfully throughout the venue. Elizabeth finally managed to move and stepped forward with Michael's support. Tears were streaming down her face, but her posture was dignified. "Surgery is not something to be ashamed of," William continued. "It is a manifestation of the will to live, a testament to courage." At that moment, William took out a tablet and connected it to the screen. "By the way, Victoria," he looked around the venue. "Would you like to show us your own before and after?" Tension ran through the venue again. Controlled by William's hand, images from the tablet were displayed on the large screen. There was a photo of Victoria in her late teens. She had markedly different features from now. Her nose was slightly larger, her jaw was somewhat recessed, and her cheeks were fuller. Next to it was a photo of Victoria now, and the differences between the two were obvious. "This is," William continued in a calm voice, "photos of Victoria at 19 and 26 years old." A murmur went through the audience. Victoria's face turned bright red, and she grabbed the edge of the table with trembling hands. Stop. Her voice trembled. That's not. Without interrupting her words, William quietly continued his explanation. Actually, a few months ago, Victoria came to the records room at my hospital. She said she was researching Elizabeth's surgical records, but as a doctor, I felt something was off. He paused and looked around the venue. I felt unnaturalness in her words and actions, especially how calmly she inquired about her sister's wounds, which made me wary. Elizabeth stared at Victoria. In her eyes was not anger, but deep sadness and surprise. Michael stood beside her, supporting her with an arm around her shoulder. And then by chance, I remembered that she had previously received cosmetic surgery at my hospital, William continued. As I met her several times during the wedding preparations, I also noticed her attitude toward Elizabeth. Just in case, I confirmed her own surgical records. Unfortunately, my intuition was correct. On the screen, detailed comparison photos of Victoria before and after cosmetic surgery were displayed. Changes to her nose shape, jawline correction, and cheekbone enhancement, all were modifications for beauty purposes. In fact, Victoria also came to my hospital for cosmetic surgery. She received 3 operations, William stated matter-of-factly. The difference is that Elizabeth's surgeries were to save her life, while Victoria's were purely for cosmetic purposes. A look of astonishment crossed Elizabeth's face. She gazed at her sister. Vicky, why? Victoria stood up and cried out in a trembling voice. No. This is a lie. She tried to hurry toward the exit. I just, for you, wanted everyone to know. There are medical records and consent forms, William said calmly. Furthermore, I know that when you were collecting your sister's photos, you were looking at charts in my hospital. Victoria stopped in her tracks. Her shoulders slumped, as if collapsing. You don't understand. She said in a small voice. Lizzie was always special. Parents' love, everyone's attention, everything was hers. Elizabeth quietly approached her sister. Vicky, I never meant to. Don't you know? Victoria turned around. Tears were flowing from her eyes. Mom and Dad sacrificed everything for your surgeries. My birthday parties, school plays, college choices, everything revolved around you. But that was... Elizabeth faltered. The accident was a bad thing. But it made you special, Victoria said bitterly. I was always just Elizabeth's sister. So? She put her hand to her face. I wanted to be special too. John and Martha stood up and approached their 2 daughters. Martha's face showed deep sadness. Victoria, we didn't know. That you felt this way. How could you know? Victoria shot back sharply. Your eyes were always only on Lizzie. That's not true, John said quietly. We loved you just the same. It's just that Lizzie's life was in danger. We had no choice. The venue was dead silent. The invited guests were at a loss for words, witnessing this family's tragic confrontation. Michael stepped forward and took Elizabeth's hand. I love you, he whispered quietly in her ear. No matter what, I love you. Tears ran down Elizabeth's cheeks. But they weren't tears of humiliation, but tears of emotions that had been suppressed for years being released. She slowly took the microphone and took a deep breath. Everyone, she began in a trembling voice. I apologize for how things have turned out today. She faltered for a moment, but supported by Michael's encouraging gaze, she continued. But this is part of my life too. I experienced an accident and surgeries, and I rose from that. I am not ashamed of it. She looked at Victoria. Vicky, I didn't know that you were harboring such feelings. She extended her hand to her sister. You are my sister. That alone makes you special. But Victoria brushed aside that hand, shouted it enough, and ran out of the venue. The door closed with a loud sound, leaving a heavy silence. Elizabeth almost collapsed, but Michael firmly supported her. William stepped forward and approached the couple. Elizabeth, I'm sorry, he offered sincere words of apology. I didn't intend to ruin your special day like this. No, William, Elizabeth shook her head. You only revealed the truth. I'm grateful. Michael took the microphone and said to the people in the venue, our wedding is no longer perfect. He smiled slightly. But life isn't perfect either. Still, I am proud to share my life with this woman. He took Elizabeth's hand. I fell in love with her strength and beauty. Let's walk together into the future, not the past. Warm applause erupted from the venue. Many people stood up and offered words of blessing to the bride and groom. Despite her confusion and sadness, Elizabeth was surrounded by Michael and his family, as well as her own parents, and resolved to take the first step into her new life. Her heart still held complex feelings for her sister, but tonight was her wedding. She couldn't let this day be ruined. The music began to flow again, and Michael led Elizabeth to the dance floor. Are you okay? He asked gently. Yes, Elizabeth nodded slightly. We're moving forward now. 3 weeks later, Elizabeth and Michael returned from their honeymoon in Italy. As Michael's car approached their new home, Elizabeth gazed at the Boston scenery outside the window, lost in thought. Any word from Vicky yet? Michael quietly asked. Elizabeth shook her head. Nothing. My parents are worried too. Since the wedding incident, Victoria had disappeared. She wasn't answering calls from her parents, and her apartment was empty. Elizabeth's heart was a mix of anger and concern. Maybe she needs time, Michael gently squeezed his wife's hand. Life at home began, and Elizabeth returned to work. On the surface, normal days continued, but something had changed in her heart. At William's suggestion, she began meeting with a medical psychological counselor. Scars are a part of me. But they're not all of me, Elizabeth said during counseling. For a long time, I've hidden my past. I don't think I need to hide anymore. As summer passed and the leaves began to change color in October, an unexpected visitor came to Elizabeth's office. It's been a while, Lizzie. Standing at the door was Victoria. She looked thin, pale, and insecure, but it was definitely her. Vicky. Elizabeth stood up. The sisters faced each other without words, and after a few seconds of silence, Elizabeth was the first to approach. Sit down. About that. I came to apologize, Victoria said in a small voice. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just, now I understand how much you were hurt. Tears welled up in her eyes. The wedding photos leaked on social media. I was condemned by everyone. I lost my job. She faltered. But that made me realize what you've endured since you were a child. Elizabeth quietly listened to her sister. The anger was still there, but at the same time, she understood that years of misunderstandings and unresolved feelings lay between them. We weren't perfect sisters, Elizabeth finally spoke. But we're family. We always will be. That winter at Christmas, the Morrison and Harrison families held a joint party. Warm lights illuminated Elizabeth and Michael's new home, and laughter echoed. Victoria was also invited, and although reserved, she tried to blend in with the gathering. Let's make a toast, William Harrison raised his glass. To new beginnings. As everyone clinked glasses, Elizabeth touched Michael's arm and pointed out the window. Snow had quietly begun to fall. Look, she smiled. The beginning of a new season. A year later, Elizabeth and Michael established the A New Face Foundation. This foundation, supporting children who suffered facial injuries from accidents or diseases, became a special project combining William's medical knowledge and Elizabeth's design sensibility. True beauty lies not in appearance, but in inner strength, Elizabeth said at the foundation's launch event. On a large screen, her own recovery journey was displayed. The photos that once tormented her now gave hope to many. And in one corner of the venue was Victoria, holding a camera. She was recording her sister's activities as the foundation's public relations representative. The relationship between the two wasn't completely back to normal, but a new bond was gradually forming. Scars are not necessarily ugly. They are a testament to having lived, a symbol of the courage to overcome. Elizabeth Harrison now carried this truth in her heart as she took a step into her new life.